live. We'll put it live. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're broadcasting still from the National Results Operating Centre here in Pretoria, and the results still coming in. Well, I had mentioned to you that it seemed to be at a little bit of a dead standstill, but now the results seem to be moving, and that board is changing. The biggest change I can tell you is in the Gauteng province now. Suddenly that jumped up. We were sitting in the 60s. Now we're right up at 78% of the votes. The total voting districts have now been declared. And I can tell you that the ANC is sitting at 53%, the DA 30%, and the EFF 9.8%. So that's the province I can tell you that moved the most. And in terms of official results coming in Mpumalanga, 100% declared, ANC 78%, the DA 10%, and the Economic Freedom Fighters 6%. Another province that's 100% declared is the Northern Cape, and that is the ANC 63%, the DA 23%, and the EFF 5%. So those are the provinces. I know there are a lot more provinces to have a look at, but the Northwest is almost there. It's sitting at 99% of the voting districts declared, ANC 67%, the DA 12.6%, and the EFF 12.5%. Very, very close there. So it's still not finished, so you'll see that perhaps EFF becomes the official opposition, or the DA stays the official opposition, so we'll have to look at that. But just before I get into my interview, just for the national ballot and the national tally, let me tell you, 94.79% of the voting districts have been declared, and let's have a look at the numbers as they came in now. We've got the ANC at 10,419,881 votes. The DA coming in second position with 3,664,724 votes, and the EFF 1 million. They have gone over a million from when I last looked. They were still below the 1 million mark. They're now at 1,018,000 votes. So there you go. That's the picture that I can give you now of the top three performing parties in the province, in the country. That's the national ballot that I'm looking at. So I hope that gives you a clearer picture as to what's been happening this morning. Just one thing before I get into my interview. Speaking to the IEC, Masutu Moepia, he's saying that he really is hoping that sometime today the official results will be declared. That's what he's hoping for. May not be the case. It might happen tomorrow, but he is saying that he's pretty confident and hoping that today the official result will be announced and the voting will be finalized. South Africa has gone through transformation in the 20 years of our democracy. And I think that's an understatement if I've ever made one. But there's been so much to document over this period. And I think photographs tell you an unbelievable story. The photographic book, Another Country, South Africa, New Portraits, gives an unvarnished account of what has actually changed. Here we go. This is the book that I'm talking about. What's changed in this country through the lens of existing photographs. The book is a follow-up to the author Reiner Leist's Blue Portraits. This was published in 1993 on the eve of our first democratic elections. Well, in studio with me, I have got the author of the book, Reiner Leist. Good morning. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
And isn't it wonderful to be here 20 years into democracy and not sitting in our Johannesburg studio, but sitting here at the heart of the elections? Must be a good feeling for you.
It's amazing.
Yeah, indeed. Talk to us about the book, because some people perhaps don't really know the story. It's a book that has followed the lives of the people that you profiled back in 1993.
That's correct. It's a small miracle to me that the book exists, in the sense that I was a naive kid, traveling all around the country. It was on pickup trucks in the back of a pickup truck in the townships at night, and I was naive. I was doing fearless things, and I was able to ask 200 South Africans from all around the country about their view of South Africa.
Yeah, but not just any South Africans, because you've got such a great diverse mix. I mean, we're talking from normal people that you met in the streets in different provinces throughout the country to our massive political leaders, and you managed to get access to them. How did you do that?
That's a good question. I don't really know myself. I think I remember, spending years on Nelson Mandela's interview, and I remember Jill Marcus, who then became the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, right? She was on the phone talking to somebody in the back and saying, "He's not going away. We have to give him an appointment." I think it was just tenacity and generosity of everyone involved. I mean, Chris Harney gave me an interview. Everybody around me said, "He's never going to meet you. He's never going to meet you." And I waited for him 4 hours, but he did show up, and he spent hours with me, giving me an amazing monologue about his life, saying how his mother was illiterate and couldn't read or write. And I still feel what he shared, with me 20 years ago, and that was, less than a year before he died.
That's amazing. Let's have a look at some of the photographs, and then you can tell us a little bit about the story of the people that you met, and 20 years later, when you met them again, how their lives had changed. I mean, look at this beautiful photo. This is Albertina and Walter Sisulu. 20 years later, that's Mama Albertina Sisulu before she passed away. Tell us about this story.
It was very generous again of Albertina to invite me over and for tea at her house in Soweto, and we had just started the conversation, and it was very open and personable. And suddenly Walter came back, and some clash had happened between Inkatha Freedom Party and ANC supporters with some tragic deaths, and we had to interrupt our meeting, but Walter was so generous and said, "Well, this situation." He still wanted to hold hands.
Isn't that lovely?
And I can't forget that moment where I had their hands touched, and I still can't get over it. That warmth that emanated from that moment of them. They just couldn't leave their hands off each other.
That's beautiful.
And, that was just something that stayed with me for 20 years as well.
Wow. And then, of course, that photograph of Albertina Sisulu sitting on her own, and obviously at her home as well. So you went to go and visit her before she passed away. How long was that before her passing?
I think that's about a year.
That was a year before.
So,
and what was she like when you spoke to her again after all those years?
Well, her granddaughter, Ayanda, was really the one who positioned the relationship between the images to each other. Albertina was at quite an advanced age at that point, and she said she remembered, but she didn't really go into detail in extended conversation. But Ayanda made a brilliant conversation on the relationship of those images.
That's beautiful. Well, there's this stunning picture, which I know we put up on air, of Madiba that you also managed to get. When was this taken? 93?
That is taken in May 1993. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. That's a beautiful photograph. What was it like?
It was an incredible situation. I mean, the reason it's on the cover, I think, is for me because it's just that moment of expectation, right? It's like everything's possible, everything's happening. It's like, he's a president in waiting, and there we are. And I think we all have that situation in our lives in different times. Before we take on a new job, before we have a child, or and what actually really happens is then, told in those relationships between photographs and narratives in this book.
Yeah, and then a couple of years later, obviously, Madiba passed away, but this photograph that you've got of Ndaba Mandela, this looks very new. When was this one taken?
That was taken in 2010, yeah.
So this was 2010. Madiba was still alive at this time. Obviously, last year was when we saw the passing of him, but you obviously weren't able to get access to Madiba.
I did. Amina Kachalia was very generous, trying to get me to meet with Madiba, but I also felt it was really, really interesting to see what was the next generation or the generation after thinking, and Ndaba, of course, has similar physical demeanor as Madiba has. His voice is very similar, his stature, and I was encouraged to ask him, and I drove past him on the street in Cape Town, and I just stopped.
Oh, you kidding me?
I stopped and I said, Dubba, would you talk to me? And he was laughing. And
you must be one of the luckiest people around.
He was so generous, and he said, come by my office, you know, here's my card.
And you weren't even stalking him, he just happened to be crossing the road.
He was so nice and so generous.
That's incredible.
It was very, very
That's incredible. I mean, you keep talking about Chris Hani, and this photograph of Chris Hani is beautiful. Look at that. Talk to us about your meeting of Chris Hani.
Yes, I like I said, I'd waited like several hours, at least maybe 4 or 5 hours in his office, and everybody thought, oh, he's never going to show up, and he did. And there he was, you know, basically speaking an hour long about his life and the hardship that was his background, and his parents' background. And he literally spent another 2 hours after that with me to make a strong photograph. He was so patient and so generous. I still remember that to this day.
That's amazing. But now, obviously, 10 years down, or 20 years down the line, Chris Hani not being around, and that devastating incident of the assassination of Chris Hani.
Yeah.
But you still managed to, 20 years on, capture him, but in a very different manner. So let's put the photograph that you have taken in this area. You've actually taken this in the Chris Hani district municipality in the Eastern Cape.
Actually, no, the people come from there. That
so you mean
that makes it even that wasn't even there.
This wasn't even there.
It was also an accident.
Where was this taken?
I just approached them. You see on the caption exactly where it is.
Oh, they're in Vormer and stuff in the Northern Cape. So they
and they
come
only
from
let
that
me
area,
photograph them because Chris Hani was in the earlier book. I showed them to him and said, oh, it's... And they talked about him and admired him, and I thought that was the connection that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Who is representing some of what Chris Hani was thinking about at that time.
Fantastic. So that's also a magnificent photograph. But on air at the moment, we're busy having a look at just a couple of the photographs and the comparisons and how things have changed. Even though we've been highlighting just some of the top politicians and freedom fighters of our country, you spoke to normal, average South Africans and how their lives have changed.
Yes.
For the better, for the worse, what would you say? This photo is great. Let's talk about this one, because this is for the better.
This is the Mangena family, and they've made incredible strides. Their mother, Lizzie, has worked as a domestic worker for 40 years. She talks about what she liked and didn't like about that, and what it enabled her to do for her family. And one of her daughters is now an attorney with one of the biggest law firms in the country. Another daughter is working for a big accountant firm. They're big stars in the project.
That's so incredible. Now look at that. There you go. The arch himself.
Yes.
He looks the same, just a little bit just a little bit of a weight gain. Other than that, he still looks so good. That must have been nice to meet the arch.
Of course. I met him, in fact, in the 90s several times because I wasn't happy with my first photograph, and he was so generous that he let me come back, and I photographed him a few times. So this is actually an unpublished photograph of him from early on.
Amazing. So there's our final photograph. But in fact, that photograph we were talking about earlier, about the Chris Hani district, and those were that one of the guy in the red and the blue. That's the picture of them that you took further after Chris Hani.
Yes.
The picture next to them?
They don't actually belong together. The picture on the right is Christopher Umat, who was a street kid. He was homeless at the time. In the early 90s, and there's the other picture. I don't know if I can
please
hold that up. There.
Okay, so that was him 20 years ago.
I don't know if you can catch it.
Christopher Umat.
And there's the new picture.
Okay.
He's still homeless today, and he talks about the hardship of what that means to live on the street and not. He feels he never received the help he needed to get out of that life. What
a pleasure talking to you and reminiscing. I just think it's so important 20 years down the line to have a look at things like this. Bookstores around the country, this is available?
I hope so.
All right, good indeed. Thank you for talking to us here on the program. Reiner Leist, who wrote the book Another Country indeed, 20 years down the line. This book has photographs of people that were taken 20 years ago, and then their present photographs, and also a write-up on how their lives have changed. And living here in South Africa, what it all means. So really, really a lovely coffee table book, I must say, to keep. All right, Tabiso,